Grüß, willkommen in einem meiner Video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 6 of my Napoleonische-Kriegsführung video series. In this video, I'll be covering the fire and movement phase, specifically fire combat. The fire and movement phase is the heart of the entire game system and as such represents a major portion of the rules. As a result, this video would be too long if I attempted to cover all aspects of this phase. As a result, this part, which is one of 3 parts, will only cover fire combat. There are 2 values to consider when considering fire attack. The first is an element's fire effectiveness. Fire effectiveness can be affected by the skill of an element, but by default, line and light infantry are 4, that is the FE is 4, and skirmishers are 2, that is the FE is 2. There is a wide range of different artillery types, but the most common are 6-pounders, which have an FE of 6, and 12-pounders, which have an FE of 8. Finally, we have cavalry, which for the most part do not have a fire effectiveness value. The next value to consider is fire range, or FR. This provides the effective fire range in base widths. Long range is twice this value. For infantry, it's mostly half a base width, unless rifle arm, in which case it's 3/4 of a base width. Artillery ranges from 3 base widths for 6-pounder to 4 base widths for 12-pounder. Artillery of 6-pounder or greater can conduct indirect fire, so can howitzers and rockets, which can only conduct indirect fire. Indirect fire has a fire range double the standard direct fire range of an element. So in this case, a 12-pounder, which has a direct fire effectiveness range of 4 base widths, can conduct indirect fire up to 8 base widths for effective range and 16 base widths for long range. Indirect fire requires a 6 to achieve a hit rather than the standard 4+. So is not very effective. It was rarely used outside of sieges. In order to conduct direct fire, an element needs to be part of an activated combat unit. Once activated, the element can expend an action conducting direct fire. All elements within the combat unit can do so, or not. It's up to the owning player. Let's look at a quick example. The distance between these 2 lines of opposing troops is 1 base width, which means it's a long range for muskets. During the Prussian first fire and movement phase, both the Prussian line infantry elements conduct direct fire against a single French line infantry. Normally, elements must fire at any valid target to its front if in effective range, but can only fire to its side if no target is directly available to its front. In this case, the Prussians can concentrate fire on one element because they are at long range. It's daylight, and at 1 base width, all elements are visible to each other. 2 musket elements with a FE of 4 each are firing. There are no modifiers in this case. Cross-reference FE4 on the musket row, run down to the D6 row, the result is 4D6. You are in column 4 basically. Because it's long range, the number of dice are halved, so the result of 4 dice is halved to 2 dice. There are 2 elements firing, so 4D6 are used. In the previous fire combat, there was no result. Because the French element was fired upon, it can fire back. This is called return fire, which is a type of opportunity fire. The French conduct opportunity fire against the 2 Prussian elements, which is also called return fire. Return fire can occur at long range, unlike standard opportunity fire. An element can conduct return fire twice within a non-phasing fire and movement phase. So in this case can fire back at both Prussian elements. It must be pointed out this is only allowed to avoid gamey fire combat tactics. The Prussians should not be allowed to benefit from concentrated fire against one element and will suffer the same amount of return fire as if it fired on both individual French elements. It's assumed the elements around support it, I suppose. In this case, we have musketeer versus musketeer. The FE is 4 with no modifiers. The result is 2D6 are spun. Once again, each Russian or Prussian musketeer fire gets 1 fire combat. The French achieve 1 hit each, and the Prussian save roll is greater than 1, so there is no result in this case. That was the first Prussian action. For the second Prussian action, the Prussians basically repeat their fire combat with the results being the same, no effect. There is no return fire in this case, as the French elements have already conducted the maximum allowed return fires in this phase. Let's look at the table to see how we got our results. First, we find the musketeer row, as we can see with the yellow highlight here. The FE value is 4, so let's find that column which allows us to run our finger across that red horizontal line until we get to the 4, and then when we've reached that, you run your line down to the D6 row, and the result is 4. This represents the number of D6 that you spin. The result, when you spin the D6, is any result of 4 or greater results in a hit. Because in this case the fire combat is long range, which is twice the fire range, the number of D6 is halved, fractions rounded up. Let's now look at the modifiers, which were not applicable in any of the previous examples. Modifiers shifts the columns, the D6 column, either left or right. This is the modifiers which relate to the target being fired upon. Most of these modifiers are rarely used, which the most common one being taking cover. That is, if the target is taking cover, then you will use that particular modifier. As you can see here, firing into a flank could also be very effective, as is firing against a target in travel mode. Taking cover in buildings or terrain can give you significant benefits, making those pesky elements difficult to dislodge without close assault. The second set of modifiers relate to the firer. If an element is taking cover, that is the firer, its fire is effective because it's distributed around and there's no coordination. So you only take cover if outnumbered and under heavy fire, mainly artillery fire. Most of the other modifiers, again, are comparatively rarely used. Let's look at another example similar to our first. In this example, the Prussians have expended an action to move within short range, and then on the second action, conduct fire combat. It should be noted that the move into effective range will result in opportunity fire, which we're not covering in this case. So, in this case, once we've completed the opportunity fire and there's no effect, the elements are now at effective range, so elements can only fire to a target directly to its front. If more than one target, then select the cover which covers the greatest frontage of the firing unit. In this case, the Prussians have carefully positioned their elements in such a way that one element was half its frontage against one French element and the other half against the other, so it can choose to fire at either element. The Prussians now spin 4d6 per element because they don't have to halve it because they're no longer at long range, so spin 8d6 resulting in 4 hits. The French player spins a 2, so the element is now disordered. However, before this effect occurs, it can, of course, conduct return fire. The French conduct return fire against each of the Prussian elements and can spin 4d6 per target. They achieve 2 hits per Prussian element. The Prussians spin a 3 and a 1, so one element is disordered. When disordered, the elements automatically take cover. The only player can conduct a retreat move before taking cover. The French player may well do this, but the Prussian may decide to hold their position and take cover where they stand. The risk of being disordered is if disordered the second time, it becomes disrupted and is removed from the playing area. This basically means it routes and may return or may not return. On the other hand, being in cover means it's a harder target to fire against. The real issue is disordered elements are ripe for close assault, which means that they're rather vulnerable, which will almost certainly sweep it away if it should occur, which is probably why the French will most likely retreat, while the Prussians would likely not retreat. As a general rule, no direct fire is permitted through friendly or enemy elements. However, artillery is allowed to fire through enemy skirmishers, or Jager, at a better target directly behind, or behind it. The French musket element has to fire at the skirmishers in this example, which are a harder target to hit. At an FE of 4, when firing at skirmishers, we use column 2, and thus we get only 2d6. One hit, but the save was 2, so no effect. The artillery, on the other hand, can fire through the skirmishers against the musket element behind. This is still within short range. The artillery has an FE of 6, which results in 5d6. The French spin 3 hits and the Prussian spins a 3, so the element is disordered. In this case, this element would almost certainly retreat and take cover, as the French will have a second action and wouldn't want to be suffering another disorder. If not, it would hold its position and try to engage the artillery in close assault during the next game turn, but I don't think that's going to be a wise decision in this case. Let's look at opportunity fire in more detail. Opportunity fire occurs during the non-phasing fire and movement phase and is triggered by enemy movement, close assault or fire combat. Does not expend an action, and an element can conduct opportunity fire twice in a non-phasing fire and movement phase against different targets. The The only exception to this is an element can always conduct opportunity fire if it's close assaulted, even if it has previously conducted opportunity fire against that element in the same phase and has exceeded its 2 opportunity fire limit. This exception only applies to the close assault element. Conducting opportunity fire against the close support element uses the standard 2 opportunity fire limit per non-phasing fire and movement phase. This table here lists the triggers for opportunity fire. One issue with moving within close range to conduct fire combat is to become a target of opportunity fire. Once in that position, it's hard to get away, as you once again become subject to opportunity fire. Unless you intend to close assault the enemy, it's best to use skirmishes to conduct extended effective fire range combat. Finally, if you are conducting a close assault against an enemy element, it can conduct opportunity fire before any close assault combat physically occurs. That is, as you move into base-to-base combat, before any closer combat occurs, opportunity fire will occur. The final common form of opportunity fire is return fire, which we've already covered. Let's look at an example. The Prussian Jager element is in the opportunity fire range of the French line infantry, and it expends an action to deploy. It's in its fire and movement phase, that is, it's going to take cover. It's taking cover so it can snipe at the line infantry, which is not a good thing for the line infantry. However, this does represent an opportunity fire trigger. The line infantry can conduct opportunity fire against the Jager. The Jager is considered to not be in cover for the opportunity fire combat in this case, because it's occurring while they're finding cover. Let's look at an example. Musketeer versus skirmishers, direct at half a base width. It's an FE of 4. Modifiers are none. It uses the skirmish row, which is column 2, and treat at long range, which means the d6s are halved, resulting in 1d6. The line infantry spins 1d6 and achieves a hit. The Jager passes the save die roll. The phasing player never conducts opportunity fire, so this is not a trigger for opportunity fire or for return fire. You can see there is not much you can do to stop those pesky Jagers. Of course, a simple close assault will quickly drive them away. Let's look at another example. In this case, the Prussian cuirassier elements moves into opportunity fire zone of both French line infantry and stops. This is an opportunity fire trigger and opportunity fire occurs. Let's look at the factors. Musketeer versus cavalry, directed half a base width, FE4, modifiers none. We use the cavalry row, which results in column 6. Treats at long range, which means we get 3d6. The first line infantry spins 3d6, achieves 2 hits. The cuirassiers pass the save roll, but if they rolled a 1 or 2 or 3, they would become disordered. The next line infantry can also conduct opportunity fire, as the corner of the dragoon is in the opportunity fire zone of this element. This also results in no effect. This would not occur in real life, as it makes no sense. In this case, the cuirassiers have moved in such a manner as to allow both French infantry units to conduct opportunity fire against each cuirassier element, which is pretty stupid. They would be better off simply to close into a close assault. Let's look at another ludicrous example. The top Prussian cuirassier element moves 2 base widths and is in the opportunity fire zone of the French line artillery and has stopped. There is opportunity fire as a result. The bottom dragoon moves 1 base width and in its first action has stopped, resulting once again in opportunity fire. In the second action, it moves a further 1 base width and stops, resulting in yet another round of opportunity fire. However, the artillery would have already conducted opportunity fire twice at this point, so cannot do for a third time. Let's look at an example of opportunity fire. The artillery versus cavalry, it's direct at 1 base width. FE of 6, modifiers none, uses the cavalry row, which results in column 8. Treats as long range, so the 8 reduces to 4. The artillery would be spinning 4d6 and would probably achieve 2 hits against both cuirassier elements. The dragoons pass the save throws, the cuirassiers pass the save throw, but if they rolled a 1 or 2, they would become disordered, which is very bad. This move would never occur in reality. The cuirassiers would either conduct a close assault or stay out of fire range. Let's look at another ludicrous example. In this case, the Prussian cuirassiers are outside effective range and decide to conduct a close assault in a 2-stage process. During the move to close, or at least the move halfway to close, the cuirassiers move 2 base widths and stops in the opportunity fire range of the French artillery, which is a trigger for opportunity fire. The artillery can conduct opportunity fire against each of the cuirassiers, as it has a limit of 2 opportunity fires per non-phasing fire and movement phase. In reality, the cuirassiers would not stop but would continue to close into contact, but this is just an example. Let's look at the combat. We have against one cuirassier, the artillery versus cavalry, directed basically one base width. It's an FE of 6, modifiers none. Cavalry row, the column is 8, treatise long range, which means we spin 3d6. The artillery spins 3d6 and achieves 2 hits. The dragoons or cuirassiers spin a 5 for its save roll, and there is no effect. The same result for the second cuirassier element. If the dragoons had failed the test, the result of the attack in the following action would have been unpleasant for the Prussians. We are now into the second action of the Prussians. Now, in this case, we have to assume the Prussians have achieved 3 actions. Once again, this example would never occur in a real game, it's just an example. So, let the Prussians complete their move into a base-to-base contact. The Prussian cuirassiers complete their move, which triggers opportunity fire once again. An element can always conduct opportunity fire against any element close assaulting it, irrespective of the opportunity fire limits. In this case, the opportunity fire occurs at effective range. So, there is one caveat here. One of the cuirassiers is the close assault, which can suffer an opportunity fire when basically attacking the artillery. The other is supporting it. And as the artillery has already exceeded its 2 opportunity fire limits, it cannot conduct opportunity fire against it. So there's only 1 opportunity fire in this case. Once again, we go through the same sequence at 0 distance, FE6, row 8. It's effective range, so we are spinning basically 8d6. The artillery achieves 4 hits, the dragoons spins a 4 for the save roll and is disordered. There is no second opportunity fire. While the cuirassiers are disordered, they still have a good chance of winning any close combat. But if they are unlucky enough to be disordered again during this, then they're removed and they lose. It's not much fun attacking artillery with cavalry. Elements targeted by an enemy close assault can only conduct opportunity fire against its attack. It cannot conduct opportunity fire against any other enemy element which is supporting it. This restriction occurs the moment the close assault is launched. If for any reason you're firing outside your firing arc, count short range as long range, and no fire combat at long range is allowed. This means an element can fire out of its flanks or even rear, but at a greatly reduced effect and range. Let's look at indirect fire in a bit more detail. Artillery of a certain size, howitzers and rockets can conduct indirect fire. It occurs in the same phase as direct fire. But of course there are some differences. Indirect fire range is twice direct fire range. So in this case, the direct fire range is 3, that's effective. That's doubled to 6 to be effective. And of course long range can go to 12. The French heavy artillery is within effective range of the Prussian artillery in this case. Let's look at the factors. Artillery versus artillery. It's indirect at 6 base widths. It uses FE6. Column 5, modifiers none. We end up with 5d6 because it's a effective range. We spin 5d6 and we get 1 hit. Very unlucky. The Prussian or the save roll is 1, so the element is disordered even though they only got 1 hit, which is very unlucky. The Prussian artillery conducts bombardment fire back during their particular phase. Note there is no return fire for indirect fire, so you don't automatically conduct indirect fire. So that doesn't occur in this phase, but in the next phase it can certainly occur. Let's look at another example. In this case, during the French fire movement phase, the French hussars move to within 1 base width of the Jagers. Because it's not effective range, there's no opportunity fire. During the second fire movement phase, the Prussian Jager expends an action to fire at 1 dragoon and another action to fire at the other dragoon. The first fire is skirmish versus hussars, I should say. It's direct at 1 base width, uses FE2, which means column 4, which means we spin 4d6. However, it is long range, so we halve that to 2. The Jager now spins 2d6 and gets 1 hit against each of the hussars. In both cases, the hussars pass the fire or the save test. The hussars cannot conduct return fire because they lack firearms. Note on tactics. Sending hussars to deal with the Arga elements in wood is not a good idea, but best to send a light infantry element if you wish to clear the woods of the enemy, or simply ignore it. And so we now come to an end of my part 6 of my video on Napoleonische-Kriegsführung, rules, in this case looking at the fire and movement phase, specifically fire combat. Alle guten Ding, kommen zu einem Ende.